Hey everybody, my name is Jordan and I'm an engineer at the Flow Foundation. In this video, I will be walking you through the much anticipated Crescendo upgrade which will be happening this year, and what you as a developer need to know in order to ensure that your project's migration goes smoothly. This video will include a general overview of the upgrade process as well as an example using the example NFT smart contract. Now, the Crescendo upgrade will be introducing a number of improvements to the Flow blockchain, including various performance improvements, security enhancements, EVM equivalents, but lastly, and most importantly for the sake of this video, is Cadence 1.0. You can read more about the entire Crescendo upgrade on this page here. You can learn about all of the exciting new changes coming to Flow, and I'll put a link to this in the video description. As you may already know, Cadence 1.0 will enable a variety of improvements to the language, such as speed, security, and efficiency, but it also fundamentally redefines how the language works and is used by developers. Developers will gain access to over 20 new features and enhancements which streamline workflows, reduce code duplication, and improve code readability, making writing and understanding smart contracts much easier. For this reason, the Cadence 1.0 upgrade will be mandatory, and it is a breaking change. You must upgrade any existing smart contracts, scripts, and transactions in order for them to continue to function on the Flow network after the Crescendo upgrade has completed. To give yourself enough time to prepare for this upgrade, ensure that your contracts are updated and staged by the end of April. And for many developers, getting up to speed and implementing these changes takes about 1 week. So as a developer, this Cadence 1.0 upgrade process ultimately breaks down into 4 steps. The first is the learn phase, where you understand all of the Cadence 1.0 changes that are coming. The second is modify, where you update your contracts, transactions, and scripts accordingly. The third is test, where you test locally on the Flow emulator and you can perform a local state migration, and this includes all of the latest standards and core contracts. And the last phase is the final stage, which is the stage phase, and this is where you take your updated code and you submit it to the network in order to replace your old code when the Crescendo upgrade commences. All right, so to get started with the learn phase, there's a number of resources which are available to help you familiarize yourself with all of the changes coming to Cadence 1.0. To start off, this forum post that was written by Bastian, one of the Flow Foundation's Cadence language engineers, will be your go-to resource for an initial overview of all of the Cadence language changes. This includes all of the new features, breaking improvements, and everything else that's changing with the language. It's very extensive and has in-depth explanations like the motivation of why this change happened, description of what the change is, an example even of how you can change your old code to this new code. It's great for both an initial summary of all of these changes, but it also is a great tool for working through specifics in your own code when you're unsure with what needs to be changed for Cadence 1.0. The next resource that we can move on to here is this Cadence 1.0 migration guide. And this lives on the cadencelang.org site. It's essentially a full end-to-end overview of how developers can upgrade their projects to Cadence 1.0 from start to finish, including timelines related to migration, commands needed, tools needed, anything else you need to know in order to migrate your own project. It covers some similar topics, or very similar topics to those in this video, but it's more in depth. It also includes specific guides for non-fungible tokens and fungible tokens, as well as core contracts. And this is because there's specific rules that exist for upgrading your fungible and non-fungible tokens, as standards for some of the network's core contracts have breaking improvements as well in Cadence 1.0. This is in addition to changes to the language itself. But also more broadly, this entire cadencelang.org site has Cadence 1.0 reference documentation. So if you switch here to the 1.0 tab on cadencelang.org, all of these docs will be updated to Cadence 1.0 references. So you can use them just how you did with the 0.42 documentation. And if you're unsure about something, there will be documentation explaining how to use it. So the last resource I'll give a shout out to here is Emerald Academy's tutorials related to migrating to capability controllers and their adjacent tutorial to migrating to entitlements. When speaking with developers, it was found that these two changes were some of the more tricky parts to work through when migrating code to Cadence 1.0. So Jacob Tucker from Emerald Academy has made some great videos as well as tutorials, written tutorials, in order to show you how to update to these new APIs. And so you can work through these in order to learn about it or help you work through your own projects when you modify your code. Once you've learned about all of the changes coming to Cadence and how they affect your project, it's time to start making changes to your own Cadence code. And this is what we call the modify phase in this developer journey. So step one of working with your Cadence 1.0 project is to make sure that you have the latest version of the Cadence 1.0 Flow CLI installed. This is a preview release of the Flow CLI, which has all of the features related to the Crescendo upgrade. And this includes Crescendo-ready versions of the Flow emulator, Cadence language server, and all of the other tools that were previously packaged in the Flow CLI. It also contains some extra features related to staging contracts, emulating the Crescendo upgrade locally, and these we'll use later in this video. We'll use this CLI throughout the upgrade process. So to install this CLI, we hop over here to this Cadence 1.0 migration guide again on the Cadence Lang site, and we'll scroll down here to the Flow CLI install instructions. We can see here that there's a command for Linux and Mac OS. I'm on Mac OS, so this is the command for me, and a command for Windows. On Windows, you would use PowerShell. On Linux and Mac OS, you can just use your terminal. So I'll go over here into my VS Code window, which has a terminal in it. I'll paste this in, and then I'll run it. And it'll ask for my password. Nope, no password needed. And so it installs the latest version of the Cadence 1.0 preview Flow CLI to the flow-c1 command. So usually the Flow CLI is installed at the flow command, right? If we type in with flow, we see my old CLI. However, this Crescendo preview CLI will be at flow c1, and I can type in flow c1, and you can see I have this preview CLI here as well. And this is what we'll be using when we're working with our Cadence 1.0 code, Cadence 1.0 emulator, etc. Now that we've got the Cadence 1.0 version of the Flow CLI installed, we need to start thinking about how we're actually going to be modifying our code. To do this, we recommend using the Cadence VS Code extension with the Visual Studio Code editor. So in order to install the extension, you can hop over here in VS Code to the extension sidebar, type in Cadence, you find it, and click install. If you've already got it installed, make sure you update to the latest version, just in case. Only the latest versions will be compatible with Cadence 1.0. Once you've done this, you can hop over here to this little button that says Flow CLI and the version, click on it, and click on the Cadence 1.0 preview release in order to switch to Cadence 1.0 mode in VS Code. And what this is going to do is it's now going to be using the Cadence 1.0 language server in order to perform static analysis on your programs. And as you can see now, we have a bunch of errors as our contract is obviously not compatible with Cadence 1.0 yet. So now we need to start performing our contract updates. And to do this, I'll want to swap onto a different branch. So I'll check out a Cadence 1.0 branch. And now that we're in this, we can start updating our scripts, transactions, and contracts accordingly. Ultimately, the most reliable path for changing your code will be to review existing code and work through these errors that appear in VS Code on a case-by-case basis, using the assistance of all of the reference materials that we shared previously in the Learn section. The Cadence VS Code extension provides some diagnostic messages, such as this one, as well as quick fixes, such as this one, in order to solve some of these more common changes to your code. However, some alternative tools exist in order to attempt to automate some of this process instead. There's a Cadence GPT extension, as well as a couple of other automated contract updater tools that were submitted by the community. These may help automate some of the changes. One thing to consider is that in order for the VS Code extension and other tools to function correctly, you will have to update your local copies of dependency contracts with updated versions. So in my case here, you can see non-fungible token, metadata views, and view resolver, for instance. These are all core contracts, and these will be automatically updated with the Crescendo upgrade. However, you may have third-party dependencies, and you will have to retrieve any staged third-party dependencies from the network when available in order to have access to any sort of analysis or to test your contract upgrades on a local emulator. For these core contracts that I have here, updated copies exist within the respective repositories on GitHub within feature branches, and I'll just pull up the Flow NFT right now. So we can say here Flow NFT, and if I hop over to the standard V2, this has all of the updated contracts. So I can just copy these from here. Once I've added these new core contracts, you can see that all of these errors have gone away. And now I can continue and I can finish updating my code. All right, so now that I've got my own code updated for this example NFT repository, everything's been updated to Cadence 1.0, and once you've done this yourself, it's time to begin locally testing your code. So we're on this test phase of the migration. Your first tool in your testing arsenal will be any of the automated testing frameworks that are available on Flow. So the first one is the officially supported Cadence testing framework that's available within the Flow CLI. It allows you to write tests, integration tests for the Flow blockchain natively in the Cadence language here. There's lots of documentation for this on the cadencelang.org site as well. The next one is Overflow, which is a community maintained test framework for integration tests as well. You will have to use the stable Cadence tagged release here. And for the Flow test framework, you'll have to obviously be using the preview CLI, the Cadence 1.0 preview CLI. And the last one is Flow.js testing, which has actually been updated by the community as well to be compliant with Cadence 1.0. So likewise, you'll also have to use this stable Cadence tagged release in order to access these features. These are all tools that can be used to help you ensure that your upgraded code will continue to work as expected and help catch any sort of potential issues that may appear. You likely will in your project have some of these tests already with the old versions of the framework, so it's just maybe a matter of updating them. So after we've finished writing any of our integration tests and they're all passing and everything seems correct, the next step will be to emulate the Crescendo Network migration locally. This allows you to perform the Crescendo upgrade on a previous state snapshot of the Flow emulator and then emulate any updates for any contracts of your choosing. To do this, you must create a state snapshot of the pre-Cadence 1.0 state with any contracts you want to test deployed and then locally run the migration. So to do this, we'll swap back to the main branch of our repository. We'll run the Flow emulator with persist mode. And we will go and we will deploy our project as well. So this deploys the contract, and now we can stop the emulator, and you can see here that we have this Flow DB, and this contains the state snapshot that we want to migrate. So now I'll check out the Cadence 1.0 branch, and from here I can now run the following command in order to perform this migration. If I run this, here, flow migrate state, db path pointing to this flow db, and then I want to migrate the example NFT contract and save a report to this directory here. I run it, and great, the migration seems to have passed. Now that we've migrated the emulator state, we can switch back over to our Cadence 1.0 branch. So if I go here, check out Cadence 1, and now I can start an emulator again in persist mode, but instead I will be using the preview CLI. So flow-c1 emulator persist, and this will start the emulator now with this migrated state. And now I can test this using any scripts, transactions, updated versions of Flow client library, using my application, whatever else is needed in order to ensure that the contract still functions as expected. So the last testing option available will be using the PreviewNet network, which is a live network that's been spun up with all of the Crescendo changes, and you can deploy your contracts here and test them as if you would on testnet or any other network really. So what you're going to do this is hop over to your flow.json again, and in here you're going to want to add the following fields. I've already got them filled in here. However, you need to add the PreviewNet node to your networks tab or network section, and then you're going to want to add all of the aliases for any of your dependency contracts for the PreviewNet network. Once you've done this, you're going to want to create a PreviewNet account using the Flow Cadence 1.0 CLI. So Flow C1 accounts create, and we can call it whatever we want to. It's for the PreviewNet network. Fantastic. It will create this account for us. And once this is done, we're going to want to also add a deployment for the PreviewNet network for this newly created account. If you need any flow balance on your account, you can hop over to the PreviewNet faucet. The faucet website has been updated to include a new section for PreviewNet if you need to fund any of these accounts. So for PreviewNet, we have PreviewNet account. And now we can go Flow C1 project deploy. Network is PreviewNet, and this should deploy our example NFT contract to PreviewNet, where it will now be accessible. So the final step, once you're confident with your changes to your contracts, is to stage your contracts to the testnet and mainnet networks. Staging is a step in the Crescendo upgrade process, which allows you to submit your updated code prior to the network upgrade. It is mandatory that you stage your contract updates prior to the Crescendo upgrade in order for them to continue to function after the upgrade has happened. If you do not stage your contracts by the migration date, your contracts will stop working, and you will have to figure out a way to recreate your state, redeploy your contracts, and redistribute assets, which will be much more risk than just staging on time. As previously mentioned, we recommend that you update and stage your code by the end of April. The current tentative timeline for the testnet Crescendo upgrade is the end of May, and the current tentative timeline for the mainnet Crescendo upgrade is the end of June, but these dates may change. However, there will be an opportunity to verify that your contract's migrations will be successful prior to this Crescendo upgrade, so that you can make changes if necessary. For both testnet and mainnet, migration environments will be created in order to simulate this Crescendo migration for any staged contracts. These migration environments are reset weekly, pulling in any newly staged contracts. Static analysis type checker reports will be published on all staged contracts that were not updated correctly. The staging process itself is controlled by a smart contract on the network, which stores these staged contract upgrades, but it is conveniently exposed to developers through the Cadence 1.0 Flow CLI. I'll walk you through staging this example NFT contract that we wish to stage. So all of our commands related to staging are in Flow C1 migrate. You can look and you can see all of these commands here, as well as the state migration command that we used earlier for the emulator. If I want to stage this example NFT contract, I need to make sure that it exists in the deployments for the correct account on the correct network. This will probably be already configured in your project already. So if I type in this command here, flow C1 migrate stage contract and my contract name for the given network and run it, it should stage my example NFT contract to testnet. And this will replace my old example NFT contract on the network at the time of the Crescendo upgrade. I can do the same thing for mainnet in order to make sure that my mainnet contract will be upgraded as well. We can verify that a contract has actually been staged for the Crescendo upgrade using the flow C1 migrate is staged command. So for my example, I'll be wanting to use the flow C1 migrate is staged command with my example NFT contract for the testnet network. And if I run this, it will return true because the example NFT contract has in fact been staged on the network. If it has not, it will return false. When we initially staged the contract, a preliminary validation step had been run before staging. However, this validation is not exhaustive and it may not be able to catch every error. Likewise, it may detect false positives if your contract's dependencies have not been staged yet. Validation statuses can change if your contract's dependencies change at a later date. For this reason, it's important to monitor the validation status published by the Flow Foundation for your contracts. This can be done using the Flow C1 migrate is validated command, which checks if, during the last simulated migration, your contract successfully updated. We simulate these migrations weekly on Wednesdays, so I can run this command myself for my example NFT contract on testnet. You can see here, Flow C1 migrate is validated, example NFT, and testnet network. If I run this, it returns false because this contract has not yet been validated. The Flow Foundation will be publishing these results so that if your contract fails the simulated update, you can determine what errors have caused it to fail so that you may correct them. So this marks the conclusion of this end-to-end tutorial on updating your Flow projects to support the Crescendo upgrade. However, there are also a number of support channels which have been made available for this Crescendo upgrade. You may ask any Cadence 1.0 or Crescendo related questions in Flow's official Discord server. So this is right here, and someone from the Flow team or the community should be able to help you out. The developer questions chat is going to usually be your best bet for asking these sort of questions. The second is the Cadence 1.0 developer office hours. So this is a special office hour that's opened up weekly Thursdays at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time related to Cadence 1.0. And there's also a couple other resources that are coming soon, and these will be available on an upcoming Migration Hub page coming to flow.com. And a lot of the resources we've already talked about in this video will be available there. We've opened up a support center on flow.com where you may submit questions to the Flow team through an online form. Secondly, we're also introducing a certified partner program, which is a platform where you can find smart contract developers to help you develop your code and update your project to Cadence 1.0. All of the resources I've mentioned in this video will be accessible either directly in the video description or accessible indirectly through the Cadence Migration Hub page on flow.com, which will be linked in the video description. Thank you for your time, and we're super excited as we enter this new chapter for Flow. We look forward to seeing all of the incredible projects and developments made possible by Crescendo and Cadence 1.0. Stay tuned for more updates and support resources, and happy coding.